Welcome to Breakthrough Burnout, the bilingual podcast that helps you understand burnout better and gives you solutions to heal and live again. My name is Florence Parrow, and I am a sophrology practitioner, coach, author, and burnout expert. In this podcast, on my own or in conversation with other specialists, in French or in English, I'll help you understand the full picture of burnout to better avoid it or recover from it. Breakthrough Burnout, the podcast that helps you understand and heal. Hello. Today I am very happy for this episode to welcome Annette Ebbinghaus to talk about burnout in teenagers. Annette, welcome. I'm so happy to have you with me today. Maybe you want to say first a few words to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Florence. I'm an admirer of your work, as you know. And I am a sophrologist, a master sophrologist, like yourself. And I do a lot of work with the Sophrology Academy as well. But in my, day-to-day job, I work a lot with adolescents and young adults. And I've developed some programs called Beach Hill programs that have been running in high schools for years now, since 2009. And as well have been starting to work with university students as well. Also working with adults, but it's kind of my special passion is working with these young adults, because I know myself what I was like as a teenager, and I studied engineering out of high school, and I'm a little older than some people, and I was the only woman who graduated from my university in my course of study. So it wasn't a profession that a lot of women went into. So it was pretty high pressured, I would say. And I was and still am a competitive athlete. Well, not so competitive now, but so I had that too. So I was competing at, 2 hours a day training every day. And then with this high pressured coursework that I was doing, always trying to prove myself. And it was tough. It was tough. There were times where, I would just cry. So I really have empathy for students, because it's not simple to balance what we need to balance in order to sort of maybe meet our own personal goals or what we think, our parents are expecting of us. It's not simple. And I think it's tougher today. It's a lot tougher today.
Yes, it feels like it. I mean, I was seeing very recently, a few days ago, some figures from the AXA Mind Health report. And so that's a global survey. And they found that, so that's sort of figures from last year, young adults suffer higher rates of mental health problems in comparison to older generations. I mean, their figure is like 42% of young adults are affected by either depression, anxiety, or extreme stress. So that's a lot. And I know I work mainly with adults, and we often associate burnout with adults. But we are hearing more and more of similar figures and talk about teenagers feeling burnt out. So what's going on?
Well, there's a lot going on, and from the studies, that I have looked at, it's some of them say that there's 75% of the high school students that they have included in their survey are reporting chronic stress. And we all know chronic stress leads to burnout. And it's kind of interesting. I work with a lot of teachers that are in burnout as well. So, it's the education system overall. But as well, like here in Switzerland, there was a study in 2022, and it was 1 in 3 Swiss teens are feeling overwhelmed. And I know part of that comes from the different school systems and expectations, because here we do streaming by the age of 16. I think in France, I think it might be 15. So it's different.
It's sometimes
in different
younger,
schools.
Yes.
I mean, in the UK, yeah. In the UK, they pick their A levels. They have to pick 3 subjects, and that's it. That's what you're going to be studying. So it's very young that we expect these kids to make decisions that could impact the rest of their life. And the teenage brain is, the limbic system is very excitable. It's still in development. It's only 80% to maturity. So the prefrontal cortex isn't fully online yet. Neither is the parietal lobe. So they're not really capable of making some of the decisions that we're asking them to make. And then they all think that it's do or die. So if I don't succeed and say I don't get the grades that I want, then I'm not going to go to the university that I want. What's next? What's for me? What do I do? And it's really, I've had to work with a lot of adolescents kind of to talk them off the shelf that if you don't get into this particular university, it's okay. The university you will go to, you will do well. You will have a good time. You will end up, going where you need to go in life. But those kids that are being, I've worked with a number of kids who want to get into Cambridge or Oxford, and it's tough, the pressure on them, because it's not just the academic pressure, but there's also, they have to have so many, extracurricular activities as well. And then they have to write about those. It's very complicated what they end up needing to do to distinguish themselves from others. So the expectations are really quite high. And then, of course, then there's all the propensity for them to be on social media or online a lot, and that is not helping teenagers. I've seen this a lot. I've had some of my student clients, are on TikTok 5 hours on a Saturday, just scrolling for 5 hours, and consumption of social media is one thing. If you're putting stuff on social media, that's another, but that exposes you to other people's opinions, and bullying becomes a really big problem. And bullying does bring on chronic stress. Unfortunately, I know of a number of young people who have ended their lives because of bullying or this extreme pressure to be everything. And that's a sad state. It really is. Um, and then we get into it's kind of I don't know, the social fabric has changed as well. We don't perhaps rely on, well, we don't all live close to our extended families anymore either. And so sometimes the parents are so busy in what they're doing, and the child is busy with what they're doing, but they don't feel they're getting enough support, and they don't have support from their aunts and uncles or their grandparents anymore. So that's kind of fallen apart a little bit. And before, those people would be the one who could really be there and see that a child might be heading toward burnout, see that chronic stress, because sometimes the parents are so busy, they don't even see what's happening, right? So, and you think as a parent, sometimes you think, oh, it'll go away, it'll get better, but it doesn't. And then, what you see, so burnout in adolescence doesn't look quite the same as with adults. They don't necessarily have a full collapse, but they kind of become numb, and they're just sort of going through the motions. And if you see your child kind of moving into that, you got to think, okay, they are under some huge level of anxiety or stress of some sort or another, and you need to get them help. But if you're really busy, and I mean, our whole world is too busy, right? We're all busy. We don't take time to just be. And if we're not taking time to be and we're not reflective, we're not actually doing enough observation of what's really going on. So we might miss these clues of what's going on with our, teenage or young adult child even, and not get them the help they need.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there are things that, in a way, may have always been there. I mean, you hinted at, the way that the adolescent brain is not the same. And pressure might always have been there for some teenagers who want to do well, who want to perform, who have maybe this idea of trying to be perfect in a way. But we also have new elements that maybe can justify the fact that we have more young people than before going that way. So you talked about social media, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge one. And the fact that our world is just too busy. And so we're all too busy. So there's that amount, in a way, of stress and anxiety that is piling up, especially for young people. Are there other elements, you would say, in modern world that are adding up, because we know it's sort of this piling up of different elements that can lead to burnout.
Well, I think I kind of mentioned it, but it's this achievement culture.
Mm.
It's all about so there's been this huge increase, in society. It's like your value is tied to your output, basically, right? So it's all this performance-based identity. I think we have that more than we did before. So, kids are praised for their grades, trophies, everyone has to get the sticker. College acceptances are harder. I mean, it's the expectation now. I know a number of young adults right now looking for work who have 2 degrees, have had really good internships. They're not being offered full-time jobs. Instead, they're being offered another internship, and it's time for them to get on with their lives. And that's what's happening is everyone's going to university, or the expectation is you're going to college, you're going to university. And 1 degree isn't enough. You might need to have a master's degree as well. And then I see students that, they start looking at, well, which profession is going to have a job in the end with the AI coming in. They start thinking, oh, well, I can't study humanities anymore. Those jobs are going to be gone. So there's certain things they might have passion for, but they realize, wow, but if I study that, I might not have a job. And they're even being told that by school counselors, being told that by their parents, or being told it by society. But if you're not mathematically oriented, you don't want to go into the sciences. So I've worked with a number of students who want to go into medicine. So they start down that route, but it's really challenging. Some of the schools here, they'll take in 700 students, but they only keep 150 for the second year. That leads to burnout. Like, these students are walking zombies, basically, and they just can't keep up with the workload. And then what do? They decide, okay, I'm just going to drop out. And some of them just don't even finish that first year. And it doesn't need to be that way. So there's just so much pressure on, I think, achievement, and it's harder and harder to get into schools. So I think that's a big thing. And then, when I talked about the world moving quickly, so we don't have recovery time.
True.
That's different. When I was younger, I didn't have news 24/7. We didn't have the internet. That's how old I am. So it's like, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. So, I couldn't be looking up stuff in the middle of the night. You can't be in a library past a certain hour, but now you can work all night long, and then your sleep is hit. So the kids just aren't sleeping enough anymore. They're just not getting enough sleep. And, if you look at resilience, I work in resilience and run an assessment tool, and I work with a lot of adults and with corporate teams. And one of the main things, the main drivers to resilience is health. But within that, it's sleep. Sleep is number one. Without sleep, so for a teenager, their brain goes through this consolidation that happens when they sleep. And the consolidation is before, when you're younger, like, you kind of grow up like a really big, big bush. So they have so many neurons and so much gray matter. It's like this overgrown bush, or like you've never cut your hair. You got so much hair. So as when they hit puberty, this starts to get consolidated slowly, 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 slowly. And so it's the neurons that aren't being used so much, they get clipped, or the neurons that are being used more, I would say they get stronger. Let's put it that way. It's not like we lose brain capacity. We don't. However, the focus, it gets stronger. But if they don't sleep enough hours, that process gets interrupted. And when that process gets interrupted, it impacts their ability to learn, their ability to store memories, and their ability to switch between tasks. It impacts a lot of different things. Their ability to have more emotional regulation. They can't have that without sleep. And the sleep is interrupted now because of social media and 24/7 access. Not just social media, gaming. I had one client where he was a gamer. He was also dyslexic, so he found school challenging. But gaming, he loved to game, and he wanted to go into that at university. But he would game till 2 or 3 in the morning. So it's no wonder he couldn't go to school. And he was burning himself out because he wasn't he had no recovery time, zero. Plus, this this whole push has made some. What happens is they don't get enough exercise anymore either because we're sitting on our phones more. We're not walking as much. We're getting driven to wherever we're going to go. Sometimes in some places we would say that it's not safe enough, so we don't want our kids walking to school anymore, or we don't want them riding the bike because there's so many more cars now, so they might get hit. But we used to do that. So we would have some exercise, built-in exercise. You didn't have to be a runner or anything. You just had built-in exercise getting where you're going. But as well, you were outside. So you spent more time outside. So we don't get our reboot from being in nature. We're not getting the reboot from letting off the steam from exercising. So we get chronically stressed because we don't have a release. The release is gone. And honestly, some of this, that's stressful too. And now because of this, there's much bigger impact of fear of missing out. The number of teenagers that talk to me about FOMO, it's amazing. And it's a big thing. And they know immediately if they've been excluded from something. And it doesn't take long for that to sort of start impacting. And I know we're not talking about depression or anything, we're talking about burnout, but all of this leads to some sort of inner stress. And then the anxiety builds up. And then the next thing you know, they're procrastinating. They're not getting on with the work. And you think, wow, what's wrong with them? In one of my son's high school exams, there was a fellow student who she needed a perfect score in high-low math. They were doing the IB program. She had been accepted to Cambridge. She was so stressed, she fell out of the chair, the examination, like they have tables. She fell over, fainted in the middle of the exam. So the examiners were so good, they, helped her, and then they let her finish the exam on the floor.
Oh, wow.
But she was really in full burnout, like the pressure is huge and it's just coming from all sides. It's coming from all sides. There's no rest and digest time anymore. So those are a few of the modern things,
Of
you know.
course, of course. So if for parents or people who are around teens, teachers, etc., what are the signs that they should be looking for that a teen might be burning out?
Well, I think some of the main signs would be looking for some form of emotional exhaustion. So I know teens can be irritable, but if they're more irritable than usual, or if they get really easily overwhelmed, like perhaps, as a parent, you're asking them just to do something that normally they would do, and they sort of flip out and they're like, oh, I can't possibly do that. I have to go and do this. And you're like, I'm just asking you if you could, take this down to the basement or go walk the dog. Like walking the dog is actually a good thing. I had
Yes.
one student where he started walking the dog, and that was the one thing we figured he could do that would get him outside. And I remember his mom saying to me, "What are you teaching my son? He's walking the dog." You know, like this is really helping. And me too, right? So you want to look for overwhelm, easily irritable, or if they start looking numb, and you can tell that they got a bit of a blank face, or things they would get excited about before they don't find exciting anymore. Like that's a sign. That's definitely a sign. And then lack of motivation, especially if it's a student that is normally motivated, but suddenly they don't really want to do anything. And they're really not getting out of their bedrooms much. It's like, yeah. So when my kids were teens, they had no phones or electronics in their bedrooms. It was the best way. Now, I mean, their desks were in the bedrooms, so they would have their computer in there while they were doing some of their homework, but then it came out. So, and I know other parents, what they did is they decided to have their computers in the central part of the house, which is what we had done for quite a while too, because then you see what they're doing, you see what they're getting into. Plus, it's better because if they have questions, you're there for them. So also lack of motivation, especially if they've been motivated, especially for things that they love to do. Like maybe they normally go to football, or maybe they're in that drama society or something, suddenly they just don't want to do it anymore,
Mm.
that's a sign. And then withdrawing socially, when they stop wanting to go out, they want to spend more time. If you find them spending a lot more time on screens or gaming than they used to, then you're like, okay, that could be a sign as well. The physical symptoms, they're pretty standard. It's like headaches, stomach aches, sleep problems. I had one student with so much anxiety, she actually could hardly swallow. She'd almost lost the ability to swallow food. And that's like extreme levels of stress and anxiety. And yeah, actually, she was starting to withdraw as well. So she was in that sort of pre-burnout phase for sure. And then sometimes you got to watch for this like overachieving and perfectionism when it gets to be really high. Because a lot of them they're on some sort of fine line. So if they start saying, I can't go to school because I have to get this done, and you have to think, okay, why are they not getting this done in the regular hours they have in the day? What's going on? Are they really pushing themselves too much? There is no such thing as 110%. It's up. You get to 100 and you're done. There's nothing more than 100. A glass can't be more than 100% full, so you can't give more than 100% to anything. And in actual fact, it's, trying to help adolescents understand like the 80-20 rule. So there's, maybe 20% of what you do has to be done super well. The other 80% can be done sort of well. And what I try to talk to students is, understand the rubric of the marking scheme. So if you have a high performing student and they want to get 90%, okay, fine. But they only have to work so much to get that 90%. But some of them just like, no, 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 no. They want to get 98%. It's like, but the extra effort for that extra 8% could kill them. Like that's where they have to peel it back. And then it's also looking at the balance. So I know, like depending on what school system you're in, you've got different scores you need on certain grades. It's like, where should you be putting your effort to raise up the whole? What's the easiest place versus working on the ones that you're doing well on? It's like, leave those aside a little bit. You're going to do well on those because you have the capacity for them. So it's kind of understanding that as well. So if your child is pulling back and really is even stopping all effort in the ones that they don't love so much anymore, you think, okay, there's a problem here. So you got to really it can be challenging though, honestly, because teenagers are teenagers,
Absolutely.
and they have more excitable synapses in their limbic system than adults do. So they can get over exuberant about a lot of things and over emotional about a lot of things. So it's sometimes challenging to say, is this normal behavior or do I have a problem here? Right? It can be tricky. I personally believe that all all adolescents should be learning, we could call them self-preservation tools. They should be learning tools to help them now because they will help them for the rest of their life. Like, how do I get myself out of emotional spins? How do I stay motivated? How do I beat procrastination when I feel procrastination? How do I build in restful moments in my day? Like, as adults, we need those routines, but they do too. And they don't have that anymore. And I'm not just going to blame social media and gaming, but it does take up a lot of their downtime. Like, we used to sit in a car and, we driving for hours. I'm Canadian, gosh, we'd be driving for hours and you'd just be staring out the window or we'd play car games or whatever. But, you had time to you weren't really doing anything. They don't do that anymore. You watch people, if you're driving on the highway, everyone's on their phones in the cars, or they're sleeping, one or the other. But, or the kids all have those videos in the back seats or whatever. Like, we don't just look out the window. Looking out the window, you can get your biggest insights,
True.
you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, how can we help teenagers find those moments? how can we help them learn those tools in a way to get better and prepare to be more balanced adults in a way.
Well, I personally, I do believe that it would be good for these things to be within the school day because, schools teach us academic things, yes, but we also need to learn about life. However, the schools are under a lot of pressure. So they don't have so much time. And I know in some of the schools here, they've brought mindfulness in and it has helped. But then again, I still see students who have been taught mindfulness, but they don't really understand why, because it's someone that pops in and pops out, right? Why am I learning these breathing techniques? How are they really going to help me? And then they don't ever do them because they're not giving recordings or anything like that. They don't know how to practice it on a regular basis. So I think making sure that your adolescent isn't too over scheduled is important. But also within that overscheduling, if you bring down the overscheduling, just make sure that they're not on the phone too much, that they do have some downtime, right? And that you are interacting with them in a playful way as well. You're going for walks together, you're like, because they need to see you doing that too. They can't be seeing you always busy and on the phone. So we have to be really good role models. We need to have sleep routines. If you're like, don't have any routines either, they're not going to either. So role modeling is one of the most important things. And then also just listening and trying not to fix our kids all the time. Just really listen and say, oh, wow, that sounds like that might not feel so great. Using what I call high energy words, I think is really good for kids too. Not making them feel overly negative or that the situation is overly negative because they're already thinking that way anyway, perhaps. So you want to keep things more in the positive. And you can say, instead of saying something like, oh my God, yeah, that sounds really hard. Oh, that must be so difficult. And I hear parents saying that all the time. It's like, oh, ooh, that doesn't sound easy. Yeah, it doesn't look simple. I know you can figure this out though. Like you have to give them that support. They need support, right? And making sure that they have a healthy lifestyle, but that means you need one too. So they need to be moving their body. They need to be spending time outside, eating as little processed food as possible. And I know it's not always possible, but we have to get back to basics. Like we make our own protein bars. Why buy them? I can make them. And then I know what's gone in them, right? So it's things like that. And people say, oh, but I'm so busy. It's like, well, if you're so busy, how do you become unbusy? It's important. And then, they need some emotional regulation tools. They need to understand breath work. Breath work is one of the easiest ways to get yourself out of a tailspin anyway. But yeah, those are the main things, and we really have to support them. And stepping out of our own busyness is pretty important, and helping them not be too much so either. It's important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Can you
think
think of
that.
anything else, Florence? I mean, you work in burnout all the time. Have I said anything different than what you would do with an adult?
Not really. I mean, a few things are different, as you mentioned. I mean, the brain worked in a slightly different way. I mean, we talked about sleep as well, and sleep, of course, happens slightly differently. As you said, there's a lot of sort of growing up in a way happening during that time for teenagers, and also they have this sort of different time frame of sleep. This delayed phase syndrome, as we call it, where
Yeah,
they
yeah.
actually feel sleepy later. They would need to sleep actually later in the morning. And what I can actually see sometimes is that adults are waking up their teenagers at the weekend where they could be sleeping in at sort of 8 in the morning, when actually they do need for their brain to be sleeping more. So, so there are a few things that are slightly different.
Right. Right. It's actually shocking because they need 9.5 hours of sleep.
Yes,
You're like,
yes.
oh my God, that's a lot of sleep. And I've never met a teenager that's getting 9.5 hours sleep. I haven't. And the melatonin is secreted about 3 hours later in a teen brain than it is in an adult brain. So that's the difference. So this is where them getting off screens is pretty important. And this is what they don't do, or at least wearing some blue light glasses is helps a little bit, not a lot, but it helps a little bit. But also, the lighting in the room and
Mm.
just winding things down, but teaching them how to have a sleep hygiene or a sleep routine. Another thing that really helps with sleep is okay, I always challenge, I do a whole thing about what impacts moods and emotions. And clutter is a big issue.
Oh, yeah.
So I always challenge the students I work with to declutter something. They have to send me a before picture and an after picture.
Excellent.
And the number of them that have their beds, I'm like, oh my God, how do you sleep in that thing? So it's clearing things out because the mind needs space to work well. And if there's too much clutter, the subconscious mind is always on the go. It's uncomfortable. The subconscious mind doesn't like that. It actually likes things in order. It does. So it's teaching them how to be a little more orderly without being overbearing. And not saying clean now. I mean, that doesn't work. It's helping them learn how to do that. Because, they're going to go off to university or college, perhaps, and they're going to be in a dorm room. And in that dorm room, everything they own is in there. And they need a good relationship with their phone before they go to university. Absolutely. They also need to know how to keep things in some sort of order. Otherwise, they can really go off the rails come university. In those first couple of years, they might really struggle. So we got to teach them those skills now when they're in our houses,
Absolutely.
it matters. But the sleep thing is an interesting thing. And I've even had some students, go into like lower level lighting in order to kind of trick their brain that it's now time to sleep, make sure that things are, that some of them will start taking baths, which it takes longer to take a bath, but it's more relaxing, right? And just put on some nice music. That works, right? So there are ways that's just helping them get there. There was a whole research done on schools that high schools should start later.
Yes,
They should
I
really
know.
start in school at 10 o'clock. None of them have adopted that. None of them have. It just doesn't work with the structure of the rest of the school, right? So they don't do that. But it is recognizing that the kids they need sleep. They really need
They
sleep.
need sleep, and such a shame that schools can't start later. I mean, I know my children started school in France, and then we went to the UK. So they noticed the difference because in France you start at 8, and in the UK you start
Uh,
at 9. And even that
yeah,
1 hour more of
work.
sleep made a huge difference. And then, of
It makes a
course,
huge.
because I knew about all these things, I was letting them sleep for
Yeah.
longer at weekends, and they said it really made a difference. So I think my daughter listens to this podcast, so I hope she's smiling as we are talking.
Good. It's interesting because some kids are on a bus for an hour.
Yes, there's that as well. Absolutely.
So they end up sleeping on the bus for an hour. But if it takes you an hour to get to school, because when my kids were younger, we lived sort of closer to their school. However, we ended up having to move, and then they ended up on a bus for an hour. And I noticed a big difference in their demeanor in that time too, because they had to get up a lot earlier. Although my daughter did say, "Wow, it's kind of cool to see the mist on the lake," and I'm thinking, "Oh, that's good. At least she's observing." That was before cell phones. So at least they
Yeah.
were, observing. But yeah,
I know
yeah.
it's a big difference. And when you were describing the signs, it's interesting because, well, as you know, I had a burnout at age 23, but of course it had been preparing itself in a way years before. And when you were describing, young people working sort of late during the night or using their phones, of course, we had no mobile phone then or computers. But I remember I was actually studying in my bed until late in the evening and being very proud of doing that. Like, oh, I'm this clever girl, I can do this. And I was so interested in what I was studying. I was like, oh my God, I'm the best. I'm studying until 2 in the morning, which was completely ridiculous, but I didn't realize that then. So I think if someone had explained to me how it works, it would have helped enormously. So I think that's definitely a way that we can help young people
You know,
to
one of the
learn.
things that one of the things I do with every teenager that I work with, even young adults, because the brain doesn't really stop, it's consolidating until 21, 25. There's new studies that say it's 30. That's kind of late. Is I teach them about their brain
Yes.
and I've done this in schools. I've gone in and taught to like 140 students about the brain, and they're fascinated by it. And most teenagers that I teach this to, they're like, wow, this is the one thing I learned so much in this one session. And then they understand why, oh, it's vulnerable. It is very susceptible to its surroundings in a different way than an adult is. Okay, I got to take care of this thing because you only have one brain. So, we really want to be taking care of that. And we only have one body and they're connected. So, and that's what we're doing. The work that we do, we're connecting the body and the mind, we're connecting the whole self, and we're bringing ourselves to this level of conscious awareness. And even teenagers can get there. And it's very helpful when they learn that then, because it definitely sets them up for a better experience in university, but also when they move out of that because when they start working, because they can sort of prioritize better. They can realize what's important, what's not. I can let go of this. I can maybe do a little bit more of that, but that I don't have to do it all. It's understanding that because our world is just not set up that way, especially depending on the influences that they follow, because they make it look like you can do everything, but we all know we can't. You
Absolutely.
just can't, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. But
Amazing.
one thing you said there about studying in your bed, that's another thing that I work on with teenagers, not to study in their bed.
I know.
Mm-mm. Your bed is for sleeping. The
Sleeping.
bed, you should get into your bed at night and go, ooh,
Yes.
this is my cozy little cocoon place, and I'm just gonna drift off to sleep. You shouldn't do anything else in your bed. You really shouldn't,
I know.
But
I know.
again,
Yeah. It's teaching, it's talking. I think having this conversation with them is really super important
yeah, it is. It is.
to
It is.
explain.
And we owe it to them to teach them these
Of
things. We really
course,
do.
to set them right for
Because
the future.
we brought technology into their bedroom, so we've got to help them manage
With
all of
it.
this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even as I said earlier, like the whole AI thing now, that's a
Mm,
whole new thing that we're going to be dealing with as well, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Annette, we are reaching the end of our episode. Usually, I ask all my guests about what helps them find serenity in their lives. Is that something you can give us a few tips from your example?
Yeah, no, I have to think there's a number of things I do regularly. Like I exercise most every day. I spend time out in nature because I like to exercise outside. I'm not much of a gym girl, although I lift weights, but I prefer to be kind of outside if I can. But I'm a prayerful person. So every morning I pray. I set up my day with intention as well. I might reflect on a spiritual verse or something and think about, okay, how does that impact me in my day? How is that going to impact my choices for the day? So I set myself up that way. And then at the end of the day, I'm also say prayers and I mention everything that I'm grateful for. And a gratitude practice is something that I really do teach adolescents as well. It's actually quite impactful and it helps us sleep so that at least at night when you're going to bed, you're not thinking of all the negative things. You then bring yourself into the positive. And the way our subconscious works while we're sleeping too, it stores memories that have emotion first. So you want to have those positive things for your brain to be capturing, as you fall asleep. So those two things kind of set me up. I eat very well. I really pay attention to the food that I eat, so that makes a big difference for myself. And I take breaks. I do. I take breaks during the day. I'll work for so long and then I go for a walk. Even if I've exercised, I still get out there and go for a walk. Or secretively, I like to listen to some music when I'm working. And it depends on the day. Sometimes it's could be country music, spiritual music, could be whatever, pop music, classical music. But when certain songs come on that I love, I just stop what I'm doing and I dance around the room for the entire song. And then I sit back down, take a few breaths, just feel that inner joy and get back to work. That's kind of like my secret sauce is dancing around the room.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that. That's a great example to follow. Dance around. I think that's a beautiful idea. Thank you, Annette. Thank you for this. So, where can we find out more about you, follow your work?
Oh, well, on my website, it's trulybalance.com. So, that's I guess that's what I'm looking for. So that's why I called my company Truly Balance, right? We always say you do what you need most. So
Oh,
that's what
yes.
I do. And then I'm also on Instagram, and Truly Balance is my Instagram as well. And there I talk a lot about resilience in that one and the different aspects of resilience, because that's really what we're talking about is
Of
how to
course.
manage through the challenges in life, right? Without getting burnt out. Um, and then I'm also on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I'm Annette Ebbinghaus, and then Truly Balance does also have a page, but I mostly post through Annette Ebbinghaus. Those are the main places you can find me. Oh, I'm on Facebook too, but I don't do it very much. I'm more on Instagram and LinkedIn. Yeah, there's
Excellent.
too many ways to communicate.
Too many ways today. Well, we'll put those in the show notes for people to find you. Thank you so much for this time with me, Annette. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I've really appreciated it. I really have. And I look forward to listening to your podcast. It's really quite interesting the different people that you have on as well. The French ones I follow, but I can't follow them perfectly well, but I'm okay, I get there. Oh,
That's why I have them sometimes in French, sometimes in English. There's something for everyone. Thank
exactly,
you.
exactly.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Wishing you a great
Annette.
day.
And I
Cheers.
will
Bye-bye.
see everyone for a new episode of Breakthrough Burnout very soon, the podcast that helps you understand and heal.